This is Anarchast.
Hey everybody, welcome to another edition of Anarchast, your home for anarchy on the internet. I have coming in from St. Louis, Michael Oliver, a very interesting guy. I actually met him on the Austrians in Finance group on Yahoo, which has a lot of past Anarchast guests, including James Turk of GlobalMoney.com, and so he's a little bit into Austrian economics and that sort of thing. But what he really is into is anarcho-capitalism, and he actually makes his living as a selling proprietary market timing services. So he's very involved in the markets, but what's really interesting about Michael, in my opinion, is he wrote a book in 1972 called The New Libertarianism, Anarcho-Capitalism, and that was in 1972. So this was way before a lot of people had even really been thinking about a lot of these things. So he's been on this train, he's been an anarchist for at least 40 years, by the looks of it, and we're going to ask him all about that, and I'll ask him right now. Michael, how did you become an anarchist?
Well, that was the last thing in the sequence of the thought process. It was an introduction to Ayn Rand, of course. Back I was in the 1960s, late 60s. I was in high school and in college, and I went through the normal. That was a very rippling time. Rand, if you recall or if you know about it, at that time was making huge waves in philosophy circles. And the Nathaniel Branden Institute, which was her cohort and lover, as it turned out, had lecture series throughout the country, or you could buy the phonograph records, like 20 record albums of the basic principles of objectivism, and they would build up from the basic core concepts of philosophy on up through politics and ethics and art and so forth. But it was a philosophically built system based on axioms and principles, and it was not, they didn't arrive at their politics just by arriving at politics. It was a sequence of thought that got them to their conclusions. But back then, the orthodox objectivists and Ayn Rand were limited government advocates. That was their political conclusion. It was my observation, first off as a high school student, then as a college student, and intermingling with other libertarians we were moving toward anarcho-capitalism at the time, was that Ayn Rand had made a philosophical error. That her philosophical premises were great, her building structure was fine, but that she simply supplanted a limited government or a founding father's view of politics on top of her philosophy. I think that was probably an act of love on her part. She had come from the Soviet Union. The U.S. to her was a shining city on the hill type of thing. And she just saw what was so good here relative to there and just assumed, those principles were it, and that's all. And she skirted around the issue. It was our conclusion, that is, there were probably 100, maybe 200 libertarians who were moving toward anarcho-capitalism back then, who were active. Either had publications, which I did. My publication was a newspaper called The New Banner. It was circulated nationally. It had a good audience, and it made some waves. One of the best things we did is interview Murray Rothbard in our third issue, which the copy of that issue interview is on the von Mises site. And that was the interview in which he came up with the quote that was lasting: "True anarchism will be capitalism, and true capitalism will be anarchism." And that came out of our interview. In fact, we put it in bold type when we printed the interview. And it's lasted as one of his more famous quotes. And I fully agree with it. So when I wrote that book in '72, which was a graduate thesis actually, I issued it last August. What I did is I basically developed the objectivist core principles in simple form. I wasn't developing anything. I was just explaining them in the book. And then I supplanted Ayn Rand's politics. I effectively decapitated her politics and put Murray Rothbard on top of that. And the system makes a lot of sense. In other words, you would arrive at libertarian principles, anarcho-capitalist principles, by simply beginning from the bottom of objectivism, moving your way up. Largely, that's one of the reasons right now I'm also extremely optimistic about what's going on in the U.S. In particular, and other parts of the world, because I think that major historic changes in politics, philosophy, and so forth do reshape the world. We know that Marx and Engels back in the late 1800s, commingling with Bakunin and so forth with their fights with him, ultimately what came out of that, of the Internationals, was they changed the world for a century. in a very dark way, but they did. They changed the damn world. It was 120 years of this stuff in various forms and reformulations and so forth, but they had a major wave effect, these two, quote, intellectuals. In our period of time, we've had Ayn Rand develop a philosophy which I think is well-grounded, and apparently history agrees because she won't go away. If you were in college back when I was in the late 60s, early 70s, and you walked into your campus bookstore, you might see some Rand books there in the fiction section, but not in the textbook section. You would find Jean-Paul Sartre or a lot of New Left popular names in books at the time. And you don't find them so readily anymore. You do find Rand everywhere. And Rand has done the thing that most philosophers hate, which is she's reached everyone. She didn't reach the top end and it filtered down, although that process still occurs. She reached bottom up, middle class, upper intellectuals, and so forth, all at once on different levels, and motivated people and gave people a moral base for capitalism. Prior to Rand, I think primarily the defense of capitalism or theoretical free market was a utilitarian-based method. It was an economic metrics type thing. It works better, was the argument. And of course, we've never really had a model of it in the first place. It's all theoretical. We've never had true capitalism. But anyway, the libertarians and the objectivists, of course, split back then, and they remain split. Though I've noticed, and this I think is very heartening, that right now, if you name some names, and I'll name a few, this is just sort of tangential evidence of what the point I'm trying to make, that both Rand and Rothbard have had major wave effects on the world. Rand foremost, but Rothbard, you can't slight what he's done. He's made huge. He's taken the Austrian School of Economics and put it on the map, and supplanted Rand's politics with a good libertarian view. The names would be Rick Santelli, Rand Paul, Ted Cruz, and Ron Johnson. Ron Johnson's a senator from Wisconsin. Well, of course, we're dealing with people here at probably limited government view, and the latter three in particular. I'm not sure about Santelli. But there's one thing all these four gentlemen have in common, and it is they don't have the antagonism which the orthodox subjectivists have to libertarianism, nor the antagonism that libertarians today have toward orthodox subjectivists. They don't see the conflict. I've listened to Rick Santelli for many years on CNBC, and you have too. And you know what motivates him. Ayn Rand does. He quotes her constantly. In fact, I remember Christmas a couple of years ago, somebody mentioned there are big lines at the stores, and he said, I wouldn't be in one of those lines for $1 million. He says, there's one thing I would be in line for, if they had an autographed first edition of Atlas Shrugged. And of course, he's the father of the notion of Tea Party. And then we go down the list and we have Rand Paul. Rand Paul is shaping up, in my opinion, probably to be the nominee, and I suspect he's going to win, and I'm not involved in politics as such, but what a refreshing situation, because here you have a man who did a YouTube interview that you can access now. Go on YouTube, type in Rand Paul and his name, or Rand Paul and Ayn Rand, and you'll find an interview he did a few, probably months or a year before he ran for the Senate. He's sitting in his doctor garb, his scrubs, and he's discussing the history of his name, because a lot of people assumed Rand meant Ayn Rand. And he explained, no, it didn't. His name is actually Randall. But he said, of all the people that have influenced me intellectually in his life, other than his father, were two people, Ayn Rand and Murray Rothbard. Now, here's a guy running for the Senate who's admitting in public, on tape, on YouTube, that he's most influenced by the foremost atheist writer of the last 100 years. She was well known for atheism. And two, by an anarchist. And he's running for the Senate and didn't hide that fact. That's interesting. I also know that Ted Cruz, as a 13-year-old, was reading von Mises and Rothbard and Rand. And I know that Ron Johnson, who won the Senate in 2010, on his stump speeches would quite often quote Atlas Shrugged. This has never happened in American politics. This is a major change. Now, admittedly, some of these guys are limited government, although if you probably had a beer with them and they were off camera, they might admit to ultimately the goal of anarcho-capitalism. But think about it. Libertarianism, back when I was in college, again, if you used the word libertarianism to students in college, probably the only people who knew what it meant, they would have immediately defined the term as something on the order of voluntary socialism, or mentioned Michael Bakunin, or Kropotkin or something like that. No mention, no connection between the name libertarianism and free market capitalism existed at that time. And now if you go out on the street, you can almost mention the word and the person will come up with the proper definition, even if they're a layman, that, oh, you must be for free markets. That's a hell of a thing for 40 years' time. It's not merely in the academic circles that this has happened, it's happened everywhere. And so it's not just top-down, it's bottom-up, it's both. And this movement that when Rick Santelli said Tea Party, he must have had hundreds of thousands of emails, as I understand it, within minutes and hours after that rant. That spontaneity indicated that these two people, at that point in time deceased, had had a major wave effect on the intellectual process, at least in this country, and also elsewhere, as we know. So I think that trend cannot be shaken, and therefore, and it will have real-world effects just like Marx and Engels did. And I think we're beginning to see some of the effects of it now. I think probably there will be events market-wise in the next year or two that will dismantle a lot of the mythology surrounding some of the institutions of the state, such as the Federal Reserve, that it has been a sham, that the only thing they can hold up and say, well, look what we did, is drive the stock market up. If you take that away from them, they have nothing in the stats, nothing anywhere they can point to and say, look what we did. And that will further enhance the libertarian argument. And now, as you know, turn on the nightly TV, it's quite often they describe this new GOP as libertarian. New York Times has run big articles on the libertarian history of Rand Paul's philosophy. And they've done a fair job of it as well. I read the articles out of like a week or two ago. It's happening. Now, I know there's a lot of other libertarians out there with that, using that term loosely. You know, we see them in the streets of Seattle, you know, when the G8 has their meetings, and we see a lot of people around the world who attach to that term because of some ad hoc or particular issue. It might be legalized drugs, it might be privacy issue, which, by the way, Rand Paul totally co-opted admirably back when he did his drone speech. I mean, he bought that issue. He is the man for privacy now, and he is therefore probably taken, I'm going to make an educated guess, I bet he's taken 10 to 20% of the youth vote and shifted it. And that is massive, because that's a vote that consistently was an edge breaker for the Democrats. And now it's not just an edge breaker for Republicans, I couldn't care less, but for libertarian Republicans. So my ultimate view is that, what does this mean for anarcho-capitalism? Well, I'm not a sudden person. I think that this takes time. It's never going to be done by street violence. It's never going to be done by anything of the sort. It's not going to be a revolution in action so much as it's going to be a revolution in ideas. And I think the seeds were planted by both Rothbard and Rand in combination. And people like Rand Paul don't see the difference. The two ideas meld together, and that's what the book is about. But for the other libertarians of the left, let's say, who are even part of the anti-Wall Street movement, they had a lot of good ideas because they saw corporate capitalism or capitalism as fascism, in effect, the alignment of big corporations with the government, and they confused that with capitalism. And my only urging to those folks who probably have good hearts, but they haven't got their concepts right, is to think a little more deeply about their use of the word capitalism, because it's a very misused word, very misunderstood. And therefore, we have to attach anarcho to it to make any sense out of it. Because if you just say, I'm for free market capitalism, well, they think that's what we've had. And it's not true, and that needs to be dismantled. And that's where the Austrians have come in, I think, to a large extent, on the up, from the top down, not from the bottom up. And they've had a massive influence in academia, where the influence of the Austrians is just pervasive. I joined the Austrians in Finance group. I was invited by Chris Casey, an asset manager up near Chicago, to join them. And I've been amazed at the diversity of where these people come from, what they do. I mean, there's some of them in the financial markets, like yourself and myself, and you're an entrepreneur in different ways. But there's a lot of academicians, and God, if you look for academicians who are Austrian, or labeled themselves, in fact, I got a mailing list that when I published the book. I sought a mailing list that I found of Austrians or libertarians in academia, and I could not believe how voluminous it was when they printed it out. There was hardly a school in the country where a professor or assistant professor did not declare himself publicly for this site, for this list, as either libertarian or anarcho-capitalist or Austrian. If you'd have done that in 1970, you'd had a list of about 10 people, or 20 maybe, if you're lucky. And now it's hundreds. And so waves have occurred here that are far more massive than we appreciate, because we're faced with what I think is the denouement of statism here. I mean, Obama is the perfect exclamation point to put on the end train of this trend that is destined to perish. Just like Soviet Union perished, China perished, this trend in the U.S. is going to perish. And
yeah, very interesting. I think you won the award for the longest response to how you became an anarchist, nearly 10 or 15 minutes there, but that's fine. It was very interesting information, and I mirror your thoughts a lot on the massive changes going on. If you look back at the early 1900s, socialism was a new idea, and it really only had, I believe, about 5 or 10% of the general public's sort of knowledge, and they liked it. And just from that, it grew into what basically became the 20th century was almost all completely socialist, one way or another. There definitely wasn't any, or not many, very libertarian governments. You could say Hong Kong and Singapore were a lot more, but it definitely was the socialist century, and of course communism, which killed hundreds of millions of people, and still some people think communism is a good idea. And now I think that if we can just get that 5 or 10%, and I think we're getting kind of close to maybe 5% right now, or maybe even 10% in the U.S. There's been a massive change happening lately, a huge awakening in libertarianism, and a lot of that was brought upon by Ron Paul, which is why I kind of, as much as I'm an anarchist, I don't like the political system at all. I give a lot of credit to him, because he really woke up a lot of people, and whatever it takes to wake people up is what I care about. And now, of course, you have Rand Paul, and I'm not the biggest fan of his, because he's definitely not like his father, or at least he's not saying the same things as his father would say, and he definitely seems to be more of a war hawk sort of a person, so I don't like that. But what do you think about him getting in? There's going to be a collapse coming in the U.S., so I kind of wonder if maybe Rand Paul will win the next election, which actually probably is unlikely, because they usually rig these elections. But if he does, it might be bad timing, because there's going to be a collapse in the next few years. And if it happens after 2016 and he gets elected, maybe some people will try to blame the collapse on libertarianism. And I think that would be one of the worst things that could happen. But that's what I said about Ron Paul as well. I said that back in 2012. I said, I hope he doesn't get in, because if he gets in, this collapse is going to happen, and so it'll be terrible if he's in and a collapse happens, and then everyone says, oh, look, those free market ideas, they don't work at all, we have to go way back to the Marxist Obama again. So what's your thoughts on Rand Paul becoming president, and if he is as libertarian as he says he is?
Well, one of the things I studied a bit of when I was working on a PhD, which I did not complete back in after I wrote this Anarcho-Capitalism in the mid-'70s. When gold got legalized, I got into the brokerage side. I joined Hutton as a gold specialist. But as I'm getting at here, you asked about Rand Paul.
Yeah, I was asking if he became president.
Oh yeah, here's the futurism. Futurism is an interesting arena, because a lot of people in the futurist sciences, which are in the social sciences in general, it's sort of a subset of a lot of disciplines, political science, sociology, and so forth. And it was thriving back in the 60s. But a lot of the futurists were very libertarian. And they noticed a lot of things happen in chaos theory, like in markets and so forth, that also happen in politics. And I think right now there's some fortuitous events about to occur that will happen before the election. I do not think the next demise in the stock market, for example, is going to wait until 2016. I think it will occur in the next year or two, and it will be severe. And so consequently, anybody who's elected in 2016, that will be residue in prior to the election. So they're not going to be blamed for that. In fact, my opinion also is that if it does go down hard, and I think it probably will, over time. It doesn't necessarily have to go down hard in price, by the way. I'm talking stock prices, for example. Most people in this country can't take another belly blow. Most people, the middle class, let's talk about, not the 1%, which has benefited greatly by the pumping up of the stock market, but the average middle class, upper middle class person has been taken down quite a few notches in the last 5 or 10 years. I understand that the real income, not even adjusted for inflation, but income's dropped 10% for most people. That's a lot, and it's not come back. They can't take another blow. Another body blow will put them in a syndrome of we're never getting out of this.
Yeah, there's something like 80% of people in the U.S. are living paycheck to paycheck right now.
Yes, I fully agree, and they can't take another. Even if they're not on the stock market, if they saw that, it would give them a sense of darkness. And I do think it's going to happen easily before the next election, and probably be at its depths before then, in which case whoever gets elected next time might be buying the bottom. So your question is, then will they be blamed? I have a feeling that the technicals are lined up in just such a way. We have enough time left on the current clock of the current administration and the policies that they're attached to, that the full dump truck will unload before he leaves office. And so whoever steps in next is probably going to be at a V bottom in terms of recovery potentials. We'll have exhausted the needed selling. The cleansing process will be over. And the Fed, to some extent, got in the way of that process in 2008 and 9, didn't allow it to fully run its course, and therefore the economy, rather than V-bottoming and recovering, has been like a sick dog. And there's a reason for that. And I think that next regurgitation, which is likely to occur very soon, probably much evidence this year, I think it'll be over with before the next election, in which case, if he does get elected, that won't be a problem of his. And this is one of these accidental type clock events that I think is shaping up almost perfectly. If I were a handicapper, I'd say this is the perfect race.
Yes, it's going to be very interesting to see what happens. Even if it happens before 2016, who knows what could happen? Because what happens almost all throughout the last few centuries, or at least the last century, quite often when there's major problems and major economic problems, a lot of the times things get so bad that the populace who have been indoctrinated in government indoctrination camps, public schools, who don't know anything about economics, and even if they went to take economics in college, they learned something that's completely false, and it's basically statist economics. A lot of the time, they cry out for more government intervention. You see that at the Occupy Wall Street. A lot of the people, not all, but a lot of them were saying things are getting really bad, we need more government, and of course they don't realize the problem is the government. And I think for that reason, it's so incredibly important to really spread these ideas, because the more people understand what we're talking about, the less chance that they're going to slip back into these statist ideas and wanting more government, and actually realize that the boot on their neck is the government and the central banks. And the more people who realize that, the better the transitionary period can be. And I'm actually going to an event in Los Angeles in May called United We Stand, and I hear it's going to be like tens of thousands of college kids. And of course, it's really interesting to see that. It's a big movement that's been woken up by mostly Ron Paul, as I said earlier. And of course, these younger people, they're the ones who are really seeing the bad side of government. The older people, the people, the baby boomers, they got some of the good side, and there is no good side, but they stole some of the good side from the younger people. And so now the younger people of today, they're basically born with $240,000 of national debt overhanging them. They're born in a complete police state where they can't do anything. They're getting arrested in schools now, and then they have to go to public schools. On top of that, and the public schools are turning into almost like jails now. They know they're not going to get socialist insecurity. They know that everything's skewed against them. And the economy, they get out of school finally, and then the economy is so ruined that a lot of them are told, and actually believe this, unfortunately, that what they should do is go back for more schooling, so more unproductive years of non-experience and non-production, and waste 4 more years and go into a tremendous amount of debt in many cases, and that actually can't be relinquished by bankruptcy. So this will be debt that they'll carry with them as long as the U.S. government exists, and that might be a reason for them to not want it to exist. And then they get out of school, and then there's no jobs. And so they're just screwed. So it's really interesting because revolutions often do start with younger people, and they're really waking up at a massive rate right now. And for you, it must be especially exciting, having been around in the 60s and 70s, to see this. Back in the 60s and 70s, is mostly Murray Rothbard and Ayn Rand sitting around smoking cigarettes and talking about these ideas. And now it's just a tremendous change, a tremendous amount of people that are waking up to this.
But it's awesome actually to see the tidal wave of, and I do credit it to those two people, Rand and Rothbard. And you do know that Rothbard used to be part of our inner circle, right? He was part of the collective very briefly and was later expelled. But what a combination of minds, because the combination too, that's what I try to do in the book, is make it one system. And I think you need Rand at the base, and I think you need libertarianism at the politics. And she was wrong in politics, and the libertarians are right on it. And I think libertarians should also give due credit to Ayn Rand's philosophy as a justifying base for libertarianism. I tend to think that many libertarians are a little bit shallow in their base building. They leap for the political conclusions, the economic conclusions, but the core issue below that is the nature of man. How can you defend the concept of human rights in a rational way? And therefore, what kind of society needs to come from that? And that would be a libertarian society is accommodative to the basic essence, the basic attribute of man, which is a volitional consciousness. Any society that short-circuits that coerces the volitional consciousness into not operating in a free manner to think on its own, to act on those thoughts, is anti-man. And we see the results in varying degrees. And we've certainly seen it here. And the kids today they're understanding this, or to use Heinlein's term, they're grokking it. They're seeing it with the health care bill, which is not what they thought. They see it in the privacy invasion, which they're undoubtedly shocked about. Because if anybody, if you'd asked them prior to Obama being elected the first time, whether this would have occurred under an Obama administration, they would have resolutely said no. They're stunned. I imagine there's a lot of ACLU people who are a little bit stymied right now, about what happened here. In point of fact, there's no contradiction between what happened and what he is and what he's represented, progressivism and so forth. But anyway, I'm very optimistic, and I think you're right. The kids are carrying this. Ron Paul proved that. He did what was his name back, McCarthy, back in the anti-war days. He had a youth crusade, if you recall, and in the 60s. And Ron Paul did the same thing. Can you imagine motivating college kids over the issue of the Federal Reserve? What a sterile issue to get emotions about, and he did it. What a great event.
Yes, it's exciting. A lot of young people bought into Obama, but that's all changing now. And actually, a past Anarchast guest, Carrie Wedler, she did a video. It's called "Burning My Last Bridge with Obama," and she actually she talks about how, just like many of the younger people today, especially 2 years ago or even 6 years ago, that were bought into this Obama hope and chains and change. I call it hope and chains. And that's what it turned out to be. A lot of them are waking up to it now. And Carrie Wedler, in her video, she talked about that. She said, I believe so much in it. Younger people are kind of naive still. They haven't figured out how a lot of this stuff has worked yet. But they're learning pretty quick nowadays. And so she lit her Barack Obama shirt on fire on YouTube and said she was an anarchist. And that video has gotten millions of views. This idea is going viral now. Younger people are waking up. Older people are a little slower in some ways because they've been so tied to the system. They've literally had this propaganda in their life for their entire life, and they actually thought it was real. And they're so much living off the system in many ways through things like Medicare, Medicaid, socialist insecurity, and really got the benefits of the past. But even that they're starting to wake up to how bad it is. But some of them are definitely clinging to it because they don't want to see it go away. They want to just let the younger people just get all the worst parts. And you have this idea and a hope that maybe, because this is really growing, this idea is growing so much now. And of course the older people will start dying, and nothing against older people. There is some older people who really know what's going on and really support freedom. But a lot of the people who don't, they'll be dying over the next 10 or 20 years, especially with Obamacare, with the death trials or the death panels. And could you imagine a world in 10 or 20 years, and a rich anarcho-capitalist in an anarchist world buys the Mount Rushmore, and he chisels off all the faces of all those old criminals, and he puts up people like Ayn Rand, Mises, Rothbard, Satoshi Nakamoto, or at least sort of like a caricature of him?
Or either that, leave them up and put rides around them. You know, you could parachute off Jefferson's nose or whatever. No, it's a very optimistic situation. I know a lot of libertarians feel like it's pessimistic, and I'm not. I think that I view the GOP as a vessel probably that's going to be taken over by the libertarians. I do think that's almost inevitable now. And let me put it this way: if it's not, if the libertarian taking over the GOP fails for any reason, and I do not think it will, I think it will succeed, which will convert the GOP simply into a vessel for libertarian concepts, using the truck that's already there, so to speak. But if it didn't, the GOP would become a minor third party because there would be another party, and it would be libertarian. The forces are too strong intellectually and in masses of numbers now. I mean, the kids alone. And the events are helping us because people now, they don't blame it. Back in the Great Depression, they blamed it on the market. At least a lot of people still are prone to blame the market for the events. But there are so many people today, I see it everywhere from the bottom up, who know better. And I think Ron Paul had a lot to do with that, by the way. He got the message across, and he got it across in a way that people understood the connectivity between the Federal Reserve and what's going on, and not in a good way.
It will be really interesting to see how it all progresses over the next few years. It's definitely not a boring time to be alive. There's going to be a massive paradigm shift, a massive evolution or revolution or complete collapse. We really don't know what's going to happen. But the one thing I am optimistic about is the awakening of people in general. The internet has really made it so people can get access to this information, and people are waking up. So it's going to be very interesting. Michael, why don't you let us know where people can get more information on your book and anything else you'd like to let them know?
Well, it's Amazon.com, and you can just type in The New Libertarianism, anarcho-capitalism. And I found somehow it's managed to matriculate up. If you go in and type in the book category in Amazon.com, and you go to the book section, and then type in a category and type in libertarianism with the ism on it. The book is number 3 right now, and I don't know how it is. Frankly, I don't promote it. Your show is probably the biggest promotion I've had of it. But I guess word of mouth, and I'm very proud of the little baby. It's been there for 40 years in the bottle. It's about time it got out. So it has a life of its own, and I wish it well. And I think it had good intent, and I think it'll have a good answer to a lot of people about combining certain ideas that should not be estranged, namely objectivism and libertarianism. And I thank you for the opportunity to say that.
Oh, thank you. And we'll have a link to the book down below. And just as a final going comment, I just thought of something. Last week on this Austrians in Finance, sort of a group that we have with a lot of prominent Austrian people on there, we never really talk too much about politics because the moderator always cuts us off if we try to.
Yeah.
But very briefly, a conversation got going because someone had mentioned that, of course, government is unnecessary evil. And just one person replied, and he said, "What? Do you actually think without government things would be good?" And it was amazing. Like there was like 3, 4, 5 people all just like, I didn't realize how many anarchists were in the Austrians in Finance group because we're never really allowed to talk about that stuff. But it was quite 10 years ago, if someone said something like, "I think we'd be better off without government," that'd be the kind of the outcast, the guy that everyone would be kind of like going after.
Yes.
But this, I've seen this so much now. Like he was like almost like he came from like 20 years ago or something. He hasn't heard these concepts at all, and he was really like denigrated and like ostracized quite a bit because he had this crazy idea that government is a good thing. And so anyway, I'll leave it at that.
I think credit should go to the von Mises Institute for that too, because they have done a lot in terms of reaching academics and so forth on the idea not of the free market or just Austrian economics, but anarcho-capitalism. They've made that emphasis, and I think it's been quite healthy and quite potent.
Yeah, and Lou Rockwell was a past guest on Anarchast, and he was really one of the main people that really relit that train of thought decades ago when he started the Mises Institute. And he told me in our Anarchast interview that he thinks if he didn't start the Mises Institute back then, that these ideas, a lot of them would have just died and gone away. And so we almost came that close, possibly, if he's correct, to kind of losing a lot of this, what was built up by people like Murray Rothbard and Ayn Rand.
Mm-hmm.
And Ludwig von Mises, he said that it would have probably just gone away, but it's thankfully started that institute, and that, yeah, it's really changed things. You see so many young kids go to the
Oh, yes. Mm-hmm.
the Mises thing every year, and it's all young kids, and they're just super passionate about it.
From all over the world, too.
Yeah, all over the world. They've got Mises Institutes all over. Redwin Weisenberger, another past Anarchast guest, he runs the Mises Institute of Canada. He's also our managing editor at the Dollar Vigilante. So yeah, it's just amazing. And I actually have to get going. I really apologize, because I could have talked to you for another hour easily, and maybe we'll do it again.
Anytime. Thank you.
Yeah, great. So we'll have a link to the book down below, and check it out. And that's been another edition of Anarchast, your home for anarchy on the internet. Peace, love, and anarchy.
This is Anarchast.